to the Weston History and Culture Center. My name is Samantha Fargione. I'm the executive director here. And I just want to always recognize our sponsors, Fairfield County Bank, KMST Net Compass, and Pullman and Cumley. And I also want to recognize all the followers of At the Peter Thorpe House, because they helped to finance this beautiful exhibit. So that was a lot of fun to get some crowdsourcing funding, which was amazing. And you might have seen on your chairs a flyer for a very exciting upcoming event, which is actually taking place at the Peter Thorpe House. So it's going to be Sunday, September 29th at 4 o'clock. And Maryclare and Garvin, they've been so gracious to open up their home and their property and hosting a fundraiser for Weston History and Culture Center and our upcoming permanent exhibit in the barn, which is called Weston at Work. So at this fun event, there's going to be house tours, property tours, there's going to be appetizers, there's going to be a 1950s Airstream serving cocktails and wine, there's going to be some fantastic raffle prizes, as well as a singer, yes. Everyone will be serenaded by Cameron Smith, who is a tenor, just like James Melton was, and he's going to be serenading everyone from the balcony, which James Melton did. So we get to kind of step back in time a little bit. So we really hope that everyone will come out to that. And so please, if you can't come, pass that flyer on to a family, friend, or acquaintance that might be interested in attending. So I believe I covered everything. So, why don't I have you ladies introduce yourselves? Margo, do you want to go first?
I first discovered Maryclare when she emailed me because she had discovered my family owned a house, and it was such a joy for me to connect with her. I left Steep Hill Road in, well, I won't tell you, 70 years ago, and haven't been back since. But I am really looking forward to not only seeing the house, but also finding where she dug up all this these wonderful artifacts.
So Maryclare, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Maryclare Roos. I live in Margo's former home on Steep Hill Road. I grew up in Weston and truthfully didn't even know this house was there. It was very private, a lot of beautiful trees and plantings, but little did I know, I had driven past it almost every day. And we lived on the other side of town. My husband and I moved to Weston in 2016, and I am an avid midnight realtor.com scroller. And I happened upon the property during COVID, and I convinced my husband to go see it, and we both fell in love with it, which is something that rarely happens. He's a Marine and is very planned and meticulous, and I fly by the seat of my pants at every possible opportunity. So we aligned in loving this house and had no idea that any of this history, be it colonial or of the Melton area, existed. And we're just so happy to be stewards of its future and protectors of its past. And the fact that Margo and I have connected has been such a great experience. Oh. And I can't wait to have you tomorrow for brunch.
Yeah.
So even a further connection, how did this exhibit happen and everything? So when you bought the house, 2022,
January 2022.
Maryclare reached out to us and said, I purchased this wonderful home. Do you have any information about it? And we sent you everything we had in our files. And then you emailed like a couple months later and you were like, I've been finding these amazing things on our property. Can I show them to you? And so myself and members of our archive team, Skip Schaefer, who was here, one of our trustees, and a bunch, we went over to Maryclare's house, Leslie and Bill, and her dining room table was covered in little bits and pieces of pottery and plates and everything. And so we were like, wow. And it was just amazing to look at everything. And just like, I could feel your love of history, you know, exuding from you. And so a couple months later, we chatted again. And I was like, how about we do an exhibit together? And you brought a bunch of the stuff here. And I kid you not even half is out. Like, there is so much more.
Yeah.
So much more.
Yeah.
We just didn't have room for all of it. So that's sort of how this connection happened.
Mm-hmm.
And this is our first time curating an exhibit with a homeowner, and the fact that we've been able to like dissect this house from its early beginnings all the way to its 20th century roots, and being able to meet with someone who had, you know, lived in the house and whose family had such an impact, not only in the area, but just in the whole nation, is pretty incredible. So we'll start in on some questions here. So Margo, when did your parents move into the home, and why did they choose Weston?
I wasn't totally sure why they chose Weston, but I have come to find out that there was quite a musical community here, and I have to assume that that's part of it. They were married in 1929 and lived in New York City, first on the west side, then on the east side. And in 1937 or 38, they decided they wanted to get out of the city, and they came out here. I don't know if there was one particular person or what that got them interested, but yeah. And then we lived here until 1953.
Okay, so 37 to 53.
Yeah. But I must say that it came as a surprise to me to find out, my mother knew it was a historic house, but that it's actually been documented as the Peter Thorpe House. And yeah. Let me read a little bit about their coming here. On Steep Hill Road in Weston, the property was allegedly on the highest point in Fairfield County.
So they say.
So they
They still say that.
At the time my parents purchased the house, it was a perfect example of pre-Revolutionary War architecture. It was originally a salt box, a square, two-story frame structure. In order to avoid paying the tax levied on two-story structures, the original 18th century owners had a summer kitchen built off the back, dropping the rear of the house to a one-story level, and later they used the same trick on the front of the house, giving it a lovely sloping roof. All this was constructed 2 centuries before my parents acquired the house. Until 1925, the only source of water was an artesian well near the front door, still there, which continued to yield cold and clean water as long as my parents lived there, useful for emergencies. Attached to the house through a screened porch was a guest house constructed from an old workshop found on the property, at the far end of which was a small apartment, which was occupied by my grandmother. It was also a historic house, sort of. Early in 1777, with George Washington encamped at Danbury, the British sailed to Campo Beach and marched through Weston, Reading, and Bethel to Danbury to confront the rebels. The realtor had told my mother that ours was one of 2 Weston houses spared in the British raid. But over the years at social gatherings, my mother met at least half a dozen homeowners who proudly owned one of the two. The house was no professional decorator's dream, but it was furnished with enough period antiques to complement the hand-hewn beams and rustic look of the place. About those beams, my mother noticed tiny black spots in the living room beams. Worried that they might be evidence of some wood-eating insect, she consulted a local exterminator. He assured her that the spots were vegetable, not animal, and she need not worry. A still in the cellar exploded. Them's raisins. Whether he was pulling the leg of a gullible new owner or the house really had an illegal alcoholic past, I don't know. But I grew up hearing that colorful family legend told often, and the beams were indeed and still are structurally intact.
Indeed they are.
My mother quickly educated herself on decorating style, for which she already had a natural flair, and learned as much as she could about antiques, particularly antique glass, which she began to seriously collect. My father collected anything that intrigued him. Antique firearms, old toys, any sort of automobiliana, and of course, the antique autos, but that's a story for later.
So, kind of piggybacking on that. So first of all, the only pictures that remain of the home from its original state are in this panel, and thankfully they're from a book that was written by the brother of the woman who owned your home right before your parents bought it.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to see kind of like the original state of the home, or say before 1920, those pictures are there. Now sadly, your mom was told a falsehood. There was no burning in Weston.
I'm not surprised.
I'm right, exactly.
I was waiting for a historian to correct me.
Yeah. But so Maryclare, you know, how did you? I know you said you did your Realtor.com.
I did.
But you know, what was your story? Kind of, you go to the open house, and like, what happens?
Well, before I say that, I will tell you, and I don't know if I ever told you this, I too called an exterminator.
No.
Yes. Multiple, in fact. And I was sure there were powder post bugs or termites or something had created these little dots, and I had to do my due diligence that these beams were secure, and they sure are, because they're not from bugs. But yes, we had multiple pest inspectors come. So we were on paper the last people that should own this house. It was the middle of COVID. I had just had my third baby. We were settled on the other side of town, and we were not primed for a move. But this house came on the market, and I had always wanted to live in an antique. In fact, Mrs. Benowitz is here tonight, who owned an antique just around the corner that I grew up visiting and adored. So when this house came on the market, I brought my husband, I dragged him, because I had to see it. And when we pulled up to the open house, there were dozens of cars in the driveway, and I thought, all right, we're never gonna get this house. You know, things were going off the market, multiples over asking price. I didn't think we had a prayer. And we were the lowest of 5 offers. So, you know, our realtor gave me the news, probably wasn't gonna happen, and I was devastated. And I heard my father in my ear saying, Maryclare, never fall in love with a house. And of course, I right away fell in love with this house. And lo and behold, the couple who were the highest bidders on the house they were this very cool couple from Brooklyn who were looking to move to the country during COVID. They then received the 600-page inspection report. and saw things like asbestos and buried oil tanks, and they ran as fast as they could. And in that market during COVID, you had to move so quickly. So the subsequent buyers had all moved on to other properties, and it was ours. So I firmly believe that this house picked us because we are so protective of its history and its future, and we're certainly not looking to knock it down or make any dramatic modern improvements. We're really careful to preserve what we can and enhance its beauty because it really is something special.
It really is. I mean, you even found the shutters, right?
Yes, I did. In this picture right here, we were just talking about this. The candlestick shutters that I can see in photos as far back as the turn of the century were on the house, and I found them in the way back of the barn. So one of my summer projects will be to strip them and restore them and put them back up where they belong.
Great. It's so wonderful. So, you know, we refer to this house as the Peter Thorpe house. Did your parents refer? No. Okay.
No, I think you told me, that the historic designations were happening around town in the 70s?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was not kind of
No.
on your radar.
Nope.
Did your parents have, like, did they, because I know people usually have like a name for their home sometimes. Did your
Yeah,
parents?
not
No?
really.
No? Okay. Okay. But yeah, no, back in the 1970s during the bicentennial, the Historical Society, they were trying to plaque as many houses and research as many houses. So that's how it became known as the Peter Thorpe House. So, yeah. Yes?
Did you live here, and did your parents live here full time, or did they come and go? Okay.
Yeah, they were here full time, although my father had an office in New York. But yeah,
And you were born in that house?
no. No.
You said you were baptized at Northwood Church.
I was actually born in Chicago and, moved to the house when I was 3 months old. I was adopted
Oh, okay.
way back then. Yeah, so I was there, well, I don't know how many years, but yeah.
Tell us about your school years. Did you attend a school in Weston?
Yeah, yeah. And there's one of my classmates over there. And I've actually reconnected with two others, Karen Janae, who you probably know, and Bobby Edwards, whose father was the newscaster Douglas Edwards.
Yeah.
Back in the, whenever, you probably remember him.
No.
Anyway, the internet is wonderful.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we never would have connected if it weren't.
No, I found your blog. That's how I
Oh, yeah.
eventually got your
Yeah.
email and
Yeah.
Are you in Weston now? I don't know where you live.
I'm sorry?
Are you living in Weston now?
No, I live in Vermont.
Oh, you live
Moved to Vermont about 35 years ago, yeah. But lived in Connecticut up until, 87. We moved from here to Greenwich. And then my husband and I decided that the rat race in New York could do without these two rats. So we moved to Vermont. And never regretted it, love it, yeah.
Maryclare, how did you find out about the Melton family?
I think part of it was when we connected.
Mm-hmm.
The owner who lived in the house before we did had begun a land deed lineage, dating all the way back to Peter Thorpe. So I picked up the second half, and Melton was where he left off. So I started researching who is James Melton. I found your blog, and this was another midnight rabbit hole. I thought, what are the chances her email is still active? And I emailed you, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was that lineage in the file that you
Yeah.
gave me, and then, you know, one thing after the other. Margo's blog had a ton of information, and then I started finding photos of the Meltons at our house, which was so cool. So one thing just kind of perpetuated this constant, and I'm a researcher by profession, so that need to solve the puzzle and find the next thing and what's the answer is something I'm so passionate about.
Maryclare, did you tell Margo the connection between Garvin's uncle and the
Oh, I
antique
don't know if
cars?
this is my mother, by the way.
Your greatest fan.
Yeah, my biggest fan. I can't remember if I told you this. My husband's family is from Norwalk. And we had his whole family here when we first moved, and his uncle is walking around and tell me again about the Meltons. They had a bunch of cars, and all of a sudden the light bulb went off, and he said, my father's brother drove your father's cars from Weston to Florida.
Oh my God.
And he said, I
Yes.
think I've seen pictures of this property before. So another
Oh,
very
that is
serendipitous
very cool.
And wasn't
connection.
there an antique, antique car museum
In Florida, yeah.
But it originally was in Norwalk.
Right.
Mhm.
And in 1953, he moved it to Florida, and not all the cars were driven. A number of them were trucked down
Mhm.
there. But a number of them were driven because he figured the publicity value was, terrific. And, he stopped at the White House and.
Oh, wow, really?
And, it was very valuable publicity wise.
Nice.
And I probably was also kind of, are they gonna make it?
Yeah.
But they did.
Now, going back to kind of discovering objects at the home, you've discovered a lot of objects outside.
Yes.
And then anything inside.
Yes, two things, both in the original hearth room.
Okay.
The first and the most thrilling was, there are still half a dozen, some I extracted with my eyebrow tweezers, but still remaining in the fireplace are probably half a dozen unspent bullets. And I don't know if they were placed in there or rolled along the mantle, but they're wedged in the corner, and the mantle is this very beautiful hand-hewn wooden.
Yeah,
I
you
don't
can
even
see
know
a
how well to
picture
describe it.
Right there of it.
And the mantle and the supports are from an old chestnut tree. And somehow these bullets rolled into this teeny tiny little space. And they're still there.
No idea.
Wait a minute,
No idea.
they are embedded in the fireplace?
They're embedded in, so,
You can't light the
That's what I was gonna
I
say.
know, people have warned me of that.
So that's what I'm trying to
They're not
figure in
in
my
the
head.
fireplace per
Yeah,
se,
they're like-
they're above the firebox where the mantle is.
Okay.
And then holding up the mantle are these two big, like knotty wooden pieces. And there's a void on each side, and they're tucked right in there, so not near the hot part.
Is it like buckshot, the little pellets? What do you
They're
say,
probably
bullets?
this big, and the couple that I've taken out, one has an H on the head stamp, for Henry, which I believe, if I remember correctly, was a Winchester maker of many years ago. And then there's another one, WRC for Winchester Repeating Arms.
Crazy.
Two different types.
So do you think that they were shooting at these things?
I don't think so
I mean,
because
would
they're-
you wouldn't tap a bullet into wood, would you?
I don't think so.
It's a mystery.
It really is. It really is. I have no idea. And I can't remember if I asked you if you knew.
I have no idea.
Imagine
Yeah.
somebody taking a gun and shooting at
Incredible.
it.
Right? I don't think they were shot. I'm guessing they rolled at some point or someone tucked them in there. I don't know if maybe that was a place to hide ammunition at some point.
Cause they're pristine, right?
They are pristine.
Yeah, so they weren't shot.
Copper shell casings and brass.
And do you know what era?
No, they could be as old as 1860s, but they kept that same style through, I think, the 1930s. So it's a pretty wide.
Did you
range.
bring in authorities and have all of this
I did.
documented?
That's a great idea. I actually sent pictures of it to Winchester, and they have not answered my email. I'm hoping to learn more about it, or maybe they can at least pinpoint the exact time period.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because they might be very, I mean, not for anything, but they're, could have tremendous monetary value.
It's possible. Yeah.
Good luck.
Thank you. I'll report back.
Well, the fact that this house has literally seen every war that the U.S. has been involved in. I
Yeah.
mean, when you think of it, right? And your parents and you were living in the house during World War II. So,
I was after.
oh, you were after World War II. But your
Yeah.
parents were there,
Yeah.
you know, throughout that time.
Yeah.
So, what was their experience during World War II?
Well, my father was too young to fight in World War I, and he was too old to fight in World War II. But he contributed in other ways. He did concerts for war wounded. He did war bond raising rallies and stuff like that. But my father's expanding collection of antique cars posed a serious problem during the war. When the scrap metal drive was at its height and gasoline rationing was in effect, he was convinced that as antiques, the cars would be of greater advantage to America as working models of the early days of the automobile industry than if they were melted down to produce ammunition and ordnance. He succeeded in getting an exemption from the government. In February 1942, as the last civilian car rolled off the Ford assembly line, my father had 76 cars and won a ration book for gasoline. The ancient buggies all ran, but he certainly couldn't drive them, at least not the gasoline-powered ones. However, he had 10 steam cars and a number of electrics, and so that got him and a number of his friends through the gasoline rationing period. And he loaned cars to his Fairfield County friends, basically. Everybody was tooling around in ancient electrics.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. That's incredible. So you too, Maryclare, have kind of like built this community, done community building, you know, like your father did with the war and performing, but yours was a little different. Yours was online.
Yes.
So can you tell us, because people in the audience might not know about your Instagram
Yeah.
life.
Living in this home, I had posted on social media probably half a dozen times. I was not an avid social media user. But when we bought this house, I started an Instagram account as a way to document, more so for our kids, how we were preserving this house, what it looked like before, because they're little, so they might not remember what it looked like when we first moved in and how things had developed as we peeled back the layers. And little by little, a following emerged, and now there are over 34,000 followers of the account of this house, which is wild. But there are a lot of people who are excited to see not only the discoveries, but the connection to its past and how, you know, in an age where there's Amazon and everything's fast and disposable, it's nice and refreshing, I think, for people to see someone who is excited to preserve and to dive into the way things were built and the way things were made and the materials that were used and how they were made to last. So yeah, I have, we had someone come to the exhibit who
Yes.
followed the account and realized they are descendants of
The
owners from the 1800s,
Yeah.
which was wild.
Yeah.
There are people following along from Australia and Asia and Europe. And I really try to respond to everybody. I get messages every single day. And it really means a lot that people are interested. So I do my best to reply. Emma Roberts is a follower. I nearly fell out of my chair. And I wrote to her and I said, oh, thank you so much for following, thinking it was like her assistant. And she wrote back. And she said, oh, I love historic artifacts. This has been so fun to follow along. And that was
Like,
beyond.
can you come to the exhibit?
Yeah, please come. My door is open anytime.
Maybe she'll come to the fundraiser.
Right.
You know what I mean?
We can only hope.
Yeah. And
Um,
you've always been interested in antiques and
I
history,
have. I've
right?
always been interested in history, antiques, art history, and finding all of this was pure happenstance. I bought a metal detector. I had no idea how to use it. I actually bought it for my husband and took it out for a spin. And I found a pewter spoon. And that was laying at the very top of this pit, which all of this stuff came out of. So yeah, it was kind of all a very happy accident, but my love of history and a good puzzle and researching all of these artifacts has made this such a huge passion. And I'm so excited to see it come to life.
Have you been approached by historians? Because we volunteer at Lockwood Matthews for
Oh.
years. And we often had visiting historians come in and talk about various homes and things. In fact, one of the television shows had, I forgot his name, but he always wore a bow tie. And he did a speech at Lockwood for us. And I was wondering if any of these people have ever approached you about your house.
No, not a historian.
I mean, because it's certainly much older than
Oh,
Lockwood.
yes.
She has that. Yeah.
So through this social media network, I have met collectors of primitive pieces, and there are 2 plates in there that were sent to me from a collector. And then another man who is an expert in ceramics sent me the poster in there. I wrote to him and I said, you know, we've discovered all of this pearlware. I love the poster, and he said I would be more than happy to send you one. So social media has really been such an incredible conduit to meet different historians and experts and people who have interest. New England is such a prime area for historic homes, and yeah. But no historian per se, other than Sam, about the home specifically.
It'll happen.
It will happen.
It'll happen.
I
It
think
will
it
happen.
should
It'll
happen, yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
So this is your hobby, and your father's hobby was cars, and we kind of touched upon that.
Yeah.
But you know, I know some of the cars were stored on the property. So can you kind of dive into a little bit more about his car obsession?
Well, as some of you may know, he had a museum on Route 7 in Norwalk, and, well, I'll read you some more. In 1941 and again in 1946, my father endeavored to have an antique car museum built with funding from the state of Connecticut. But this failed to come to fruition. Rather than donating his collection to the state in return for the building, he continued to own the cars and to add to their number until he had close to 100. He formed a corporation, Melton Museum, Inc., and acquired a 10,000 square foot building on an 8-acre site on Route 7 in Norwalk, half a mile from the Maryclare Parkway. To that, he added another 10,000 square foot building and incorporating an existing well-known restaurant, the Stirrup Cup. On top of the building with the sign saying Melton Museum, he put brightly painted cutouts of some of the cars represented in the collection. Out front, he placed a 1902 trolley car. He sincerely believed that everyone was as interested in the history of automobiles as he was. He felt that preserving the cars was only half the story. They should be shown to the public as examples of man's ingenuity and as beautiful antiques that they were. In July of 1948, the 20,000 square foot Melton Museum of Antique Automobiles opened in Norwalk with 55 cars, antique bicycles, toy trains, and music boxes. And John O'Leary has written a lot about the museum and researched a lot about it, so that's my connection to him.
There you go. So many. Now, what was your favorite car to ride in?
Well, I think my favorite was probably my father's favorite, which was a 1907 Rolls Royce.
Ooh.
Which was painted green and had red leather seats and the license plate XMAS. But when I got to a certain age, I really would much rather have been in a Ford station wagon than in one of these fancy cars that I was embarrassed by. You know, when you get to a certain age, it's just like, oh.
Do you know how many Rolls Royces he owned?
I don't, but multiple.
There was what, a Silver Shadow?
The 1907 was a Silver Ghost.
Silver Ghost.
Yeah. And I know he owned a number of them, of varying vintages up into the 1920s. But, I don't have an exact number.
So he was also known as America's favorite tenor. So not, you know, that was really his day job, and the car collecting was just a
Yeah.
hobby. So I'm assuming he interacted with famous people all the time. Were there any famous visitors to the home or the property?
Yes, a number of them, which I don't really remember because I was so young. But one of them was Helen Keller, who lived not too far away. And whenever I pick blueberries, I think of Helen Keller. I know that sounds kind of weird, but among the fruit trees on our property were lots of blueberry bushes. Helen and Polly, her companion, came annually in midsummer for a day of blueberry picking. Helen's magnetism radiated so strongly that even our dignified German shepherd, Caesar, was usually slow to make friends, sat at her feet accepting loving pats. It had somehow been explained to me at age 4 that Helen would see me through her hands, not to be afraid, but just to stand still and quiet and let Helen touch my face, my hair, my hands. I remember standing there awed while this large shadow in slacks with a huge sun hat bent down to meet me. Afterwards, she said through her fingers to Polly, beautiful, slender, pretty, lovely hair. Then Polly and Helen and our dog would go off for the berries while my mother prepared lunch of freshly picked corn on the cob from our vegetable garden and hamburgers cooked to order on the outdoor stone grill picture over there. Someone would ring the big old Navy bell on the back porch to call everyone to chow. Afterwards, Helen loved to wander through the vegetable garden, gently touching the sun-warmed tomatoes, bell peppers, squash. She and Polly would resume their berry picking in the afternoon. My logical mind now wonders, how did she know which ones were ripe? Was her touch so delicate that only the ripe ones fell into the basket hung around her neck? Or did she simply pick everything for someone else to sort out later? Or didn't it matter? Was it the sun and the activity and a meal with friends that were the important thing? Can I tell you about the
Yes, please.
fire
Yes.
thing? The community and the world was shocked when Helen's home burned to the ground one night in 1946 while she and Polly were in Europe on one of their missions. Those who knew her well were especially grieved for her loss of the gift she treasured from every corner of the world. The American Foundation for the Blind made it possible for her house to be rebuilt, but personal housekeeping items would be hard to replace. My mother decided to have a party for Helen and Polly and asked each guest to bring a house gift, a dish towel, a kitchen spoon, a strainer, some small but useful item. With a guest list of over 100 people and my father rehearsing in New York, unable to share the hosting duties, my mother decided to invite the guests in staggered groups. One group was invited to come between 2 and 4, the next group between 4 and 6. It was a radiant, warm fall day. The guests brought a fabulous array of house gifts and not a duplicate among them. One friend brought a breadboard, bread knife, and freshly baked loaf of bread. Another brought a delicate teacup from China, saying, "I've loved this for many years, but now I want Miss Keller to have it." By 3 o'clock, the tables set up for gifts were overflowing. Each guest wanted to meet Helen, and during the tea, there was always a group around her. By 6 o'clock, all guests were still there, stimulated by her presence. The sandwiches and cakes were gone, but the party wasn't. My father arrived home from New York about this time with his accompanist, for they planned to continue rehearsing that evening. The concert season was about to begin. "Jimmy," my mother beseeched, "I need help. Will you please sing now for everyone? It would make a glorious finale to this lovely occasion." He had always appreciated the fact that she never asked him to entertain guests. This time, he was happy to oblige. Everyone gathered in the music room on the floor or on the terrace outside the open French doors, and Polly, her fingers dancing across Helen's hand, explained to Helen what was happening. "Oh," Helen's face was radiant. "May I stand near?" she signed. My father led her to the piano, and she stood beside him. She placed the fingers of her left hand lightly against his lips. Her thumb touched his throat. Her right hand was pressed to the sounding board of the piano. Thus, she listened to music.
Here's the photo.
Yeah. And,
That's amazing.
it was after 7 o'clock when the guests finally departed. Each one expressed the same feeling. I came with joy in giving to the wonderful Helen Keller. I leave enriched. She is the one who gives joy and inspiration. Next morning, my father and Henry, our supervisor of car activities, loaded our big red International Harvester farm truck with the gifts. A few days later, Helen wrote in her distinctive, neat block printing, "Your singing, Mr. Melton, was the crown to a perfect day. It was a rare treat. Your art enchanted us, in which you blended graces of the sphere-born harmonious sisters, voice and verse." And there's
Yeah, there's the
International
harvester.
Harvester truck.
With all the gifts.
Margo, do you know how that friendship started?
I don't. I wish I did. Yeah. Just because, they were neighbors, although Helen lived in Easton.
Could I just ask, do you remember another Easton resident, Bellamy Partridge, or Helen Partridge? Because he had written the book Fill Her Up, which was about the
we're out there to explore as we're discovering. And there are countless rabbit holes to go down. Yeah.
Now, I'm sure a lot of things in the house, on the property have changed over time. And I know one thing that was there when you were living there, but it's not there anymore, is this lovely train, little mini train set. So, Margo, can you tell us why and?
Yeah, yeah. The whole property was a child's dream. I mean, for one thing, the toys in the backyard were, merry-go-round animals that I could ride on.
Oh my goodness.
Half a dozen of them. And then, my father had decreed early on that every bit of poison ivy was to be eradicated from our 40 acres of field and woods, so as not to endanger his precious daughter. Let's see, the train, yes, the train. Okay. Yes, there was the Fieldstone, cookout
Mm-hmm.
thing, and then from there, a grape arbor led out to the apple orchard, vegetable garden, tennis courts. There was a miniature train, steam locomotive with half a dozen open flat cars with seats for 10 children, and 1,000 feet of track meandering through the orchard. I know he got the idea from Walt Disney, who had a similar setup in his backyard in Hollywood. I also, among the dozen or so antique cars my father garaged at the house, were 2 or 3 battery-powered child-sized vehicles for me. He decreed when he had each one of them built, that it should go no faster than he could run, so he could catch me if I got out of control.
So Maryclare, when are the kids getting?
I can't dare tell them that this existed. I would love to find in my digging a remnant of the track or the train car or something. Nothing's turned up yet, but there's still time.
Oh, yeah.
No, but we joke about that all the time. Where are we gonna put the train?
Yeah.
There must be a train.
I think it has to happen.
I think it has
you
to
know?
happen,
So Margo, you said you were 9 when your parents sold the house. And then you moved away.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, why did you move?
Well, I think, for one thing, ostensibly the move was for my benefit, to put me in a real neighborhood where I had children to play with, where it wasn't so far out in the boonies, and back then it was the boonies. But it was also an effort on my parents' part to ratchet down financially. My father was turning 50. His kind of music was becoming less and less popular. Concert dates were harder to get, and so, yes. So we moved to Greenwich, and you'd think,
That's yeah.
That's a choice.
yeah, exactly. And so we moved to a 1950s, very ordinary ranch. And we're there until my father died in 1961. But, it was fine. And I was not aware of the financial downsizing that was going on. But that was a big deal to go from 5 in staff, live-in staff, to a cook, one cook, when we could find one who would put up with my father's, strange, schedule.
And like, how many acres again was the property?
In Greenwich?
No, in
Oh,
Weston, 40, and then in Greenwich, what did you have, like maybe an acre?
A couple of acres.
Oh, a couple of acres, but still, that was
Yeah, that was
a change.
a big change.
Yeah. Now, looking back, and I know you were only 9, but what stands out to you as a memory from living in the home in Weston that you just cherish or it just pops into your mind?
Well, I think, there was a children's dream to have all that space to roam, to have all those fruit trees and fresh vegetables from the garden. My parents had a victory garden during the war, but they also had a full-time gardener. And it was really a delightful place to grow up. I don't have any one specific memory, but yeah, it was, and of course, back then, I didn't know how unusual this whole thing was. Because
They were just mom and
it
dad,
was just
right?
mom and dad and ordinary, and okay, it was a little more than ordinary, but yeah.
So Maryclare, I know you've only been in the house for a couple of years, but has there been any memories that you've had so far, or moments that you cherish with your family there at the home?
I mean, certainly all of the discoveries and the history and literally peeling back the layers. The home was overgrown, and bringing it back to life certainly has been exciting. But raising our babies there is incredible. I mean, we don't have 40 acres, nor do we have a merry-go-round or a train. But seeing them run and play, and there's a pool back there now that they have so much fun with. My son has his friends over, and they start a baseball game out in the back field. They also pick berries, which is one of their most favorite things to do. So
How many acres is it now?
it's 4 acres, and this is actually a good segue. When your family purchased, so it's really unusual for a revolutionary or pre-revolutionary era home to be set back from the road.
Oh, yeah.
Typically, they're right on the road. And when your family was buying the property from the Clarks, your father at one point said, "This is entirely too close. What can we do?" And imagine having this kind of leverage that you can go to the town and say, "I'll give you 25 acres, but please move the road." And they did. So our house is set back probably 50 yards from where the road is today. And you can see on the map over there, over time, the road bows out now quite nicely. And the Meltons gave 25 acres, which was then developed into a new neighborhood, to have that moved. So we are down to 4 acres. But I'm so curious for you to see tomorrow the various outbuildings that remain. Some are on our property, some are now on other people's properties, and I'm so curious what they were used for, and
And when was it subdivided?
that's a good question. Do you have any idea?
I don't know. So, are we thinking maybe like those homes are 60s or 70s?
Blackberry Hill and all that.
Yeah, that was.
You know, there's a mid-century modern house there, so I.
So probably
Yeah.
60s then, 50s,
Yeah.
60s, yeah. So, do you ladies have any questions? I mean, I know we just kind of asked it, we've been asking questions. I haven't heard a lot of the asking. Do you have any questions for each other? Anything that you've been dying to know?
Gosh. I mean, so many things. I'm so curious to see your reaction coming back after so many years.
I can't wait.
I'm dying to know what looks just as you pictured it and what has changed. Like I said, where certain things are
Yeah.
that may or may not have been there before.
I have a question.
Yes.
Did you ever feel, well, you were 9 years old, so this might be a moot point, but Maryclare has sensed spirits.
Oh, yes, we did talk about
I was
this.
afraid to bring that up.
Yeah. We talked about this briefly. Yeah,
And
and
it's on your Instagram.
yes, and it honestly hasn't so much been me as much as the kids have said things. Although there was one night where we very obviously heard a piano note, clear as day. We both sat up in bed and said, "What was that?"
Do you have a piano in the house?
We have a piano in the house that's actually right below our bedroom. The music room is exactly below our bedroom, and there is a piano in there. It was so deliberate, it couldn't have been a mouse or a child.
And you both heard it, so you weren't dreaming.
No, it's not dreaming, it was wild. But yeah, do you remember any spooky stories?
No, I think it's fabulous.
It's interesting so long as no one is terrified to go to sleep. Whatever it is I think
Benign.
happy we're here
Yeah.
and benign and
And what about your kids? Have they, one of them sensed?
Charlie is my middle child, he's 6. He has noticed the most shadows, and he talks about a man walking around and someone, I don't know how that world works, but someone reached out through Instagram. Again, I don't know how they can make the assessment without being there, but seemed to think it was a farmhand or someone who took care of the property and had a lot of pride in it, just kind of doing his rounds, not necessarily an owner of the home. So maybe that's who it is. I don't know. We
Anyone,
never know.
Charlie, on the staff of your parents' staff? No?
No, not that I know of. Who knows?
Yeah.
Clues keep turning up, so we never know what
Yep.
you're gonna find.
We never know.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any? Yeah.
Well, just as we talked about before, Margo, burned into my memory is going to your birthday party and riding the train up there. And that's the highlight of that birthday party stuck with me all these years.
How can you top that?
Exactly, because I remember you being quite tall, red hair, pink dress, and it was a real great party there.
What a great memory.
Bobby Edwards is still around, we're Facebook friends.
Yeah,
So
me
he's
too.
good.
Thank God for the
The
internet.
power of social media.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, so Maryclare, have you scanned the mantle? So we have a 1916 house in West Hartford, and we have like the back staircase, and we scanned the butler's pantry, and someone who had lived there years ago on the 3rd floor had put our original blueprints from 1916 in the butler's pantry.
No kidding.
So I'm curious if there's like,
When you say scan, do you mean like X-ray?
sort of, we have a friend up the street that has like those infrared things that can see what's in, like if there's something in a hollow space or something. So he looked through and he found it, because there was rumors that it was in the house somewhere.
Oh, how
Like, where
cool.
could it be? And we looked through the pantry and it was up in the butler's pantry, tucked in the top.
I would love, that's, now that you say that, there are things wedged, so, and I won't describe this right, but the facade of the antique fireplace is separate from whatever it is behind it. Because I reached up there one day and came down with a fistful of newspaper from 1920.
Okay.
So there are things in there, I just have no way of accessing them. So I suppose if we did some kind of scan, we could see what's back there.
Hopefully the Constitution?
Hopefully the Constitution. If I find something of big value, you will know. Yeah, that's a great idea. I would love to do that. I'm sure there are wives' tales of people hiding all kinds of things in hearthroom fireplaces for good luck or good fortune or safety. So who knows what's back there?
Tell them about me.
No, I was just gonna say, the obvious question would be, would you put your friend in touch with Maryclare?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you guys-
About, when, during the Revolutionary War, when people would hide things in the well.
Oh, yes. I put a GoPro down the well, purely out of curiosity. This is another one of those.
Excuse me, I'm just gonna say, this is a woman with a full-time job and 3 children. She doesn't sleep.
I don't sleep. This was another one of those times where I went to my husband and I said, this is what we're gonna do. And he looked at me like, are you crazy? But we got the GoPro in one of those watertight contraptions of a long, what I wanted to know was how deep it is. So we dropped it down the well, we had a light on it, and it's fascinating, the footage, when you see how clearly the stones are architected to create this. I mean, it has to be hundreds of years old, and they did it so expertly and methodically. And we can see all kinds of, now I need a grabber, like from those arcade games, because there's definitely stuff down there. I just have no way of accessing it. But yes, I was hoping for silver or gold coins, but so far it looks just like some debris. Yeah, it's about 30 feet. It's a deep well. I was really surprised.
Well, if it was a British mystery, they would have somebody go down there on a rope ladder.
Don't even suggest it.
I'm just thinking
Yeah.
that, you know?
Right?
You might find somebody who would be willing for, I guess, a fee.
Right? A very skinny person. I could tie a rope to their ankle and drop them in. Yeah, I'm hoping to put now that I've kind of learned how to do it and, you know, this was on a whim in January, we did this. So now that I've learned a couple things, I could probably do it better. But yeah, I'm dying to know what's down there, so we'll see.
Margo, one of the famous musical residents of Weston was Rich Reiner,
Yes.
who was the conductor of the Metropolitan.
And
Do you think
married to
that
Lily
he-
Pons.
Did
that's
did
it.
your dad help him come
Yeah.
here or vice versa?
I don't know. I wish I did, because there were a number of musicians, in the area. Lawrence Tibbet, Lily Pons, Andre Castellans, Chris Reiner. But I don't know in what order they came, whether my father came after them. But, yeah, I guess there
Leslie might, do you,
As I said, I think it's because of the lodges that your parents came,
Well,
because that's
that's
what they were
true,
friendly with.
yeah.
And,
who were the lodges? People might know.
Prejudice, they were in Hollywood, Bragiati and, can't think of his name, that's his name, he was a diplomat and,
Yeah.
ambassador. That's all right. Spain, but anyway, but I think Ryder came after.
And I think too, one of your father's big contributions to Connecticut was as commissioner of the Merritt Parkway project. And it was said that he really wanted to spearhead that in an effort to draw more artists and musicians out of the city into the country.
Yeah.
So I think he did bring a lot of artists with him.
Good reading, I wish I knew.
And I know we have Richfield Historical Society in the audience, I'm gonna call them out, because Geraldine Farrar lived in Richfield, right? And I mean, she was an opera singer, so when was she living in Richfield? Was it during like the 30s and 40s?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So, I mean, the fact that there were all in this area, and Easton, Reading, like, were there any opera people? I know we have,
I don't think so.
no,
The Alpha Ice and Pipers had a house in there. And every weekend it was like a music fest there. Everybody would come from New York City to perform.
wow.
Milton had Lawrence Tibbet, that's when we met.
And, oh, someone from the Met
He was
Wilton.
already here in Milton.
Yeah, so I mean, any of those people probably could have brought your parents out. Yeah. Any last questions?
You had mentioned, Margo, that there was a living staff of 5. So I'm wondering, are there still staff quarters in your house?
Yes, there is a guest cottage that we call the gingerbread house because of its cute little crisscross window moldings. I would imagine it's a gardener's cottage. And then there's another structure that has since a stone structure, and I don't know if that's where someone lived, or maybe it was a root cellar, or where they kept the mechanics for the trolley or the train. So yes, there's still the original guest house where Margo's grandmother lived, and then this separate little cottage that we were told was like a caretaker's cottage or a gardener's cottage.
That's a lot of upkeep, isn't
It
it?
is. It is. It's like our 4th baby. We, it's fun. It's you know, it's a lot of work and a lot of time, but it's we see it as our own little treasure, and we're excited to bring it back to life.
And I'm so glad you treasure it.
Yes, we do. We do.
Well, I want to thank you both for joining us this evening and
Thank
sharing
you.
all your memories and your like updates on the home. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And you got a peek into some Weston history that you don't normally get to share. So, and Margo, thank you for coming all the way down from Vermont.
My pleasure.
And sharing your beautiful stories with us. And Margo's book, James Melton, a tenor of his time, is for sale in the lobby. And all proceeds, thank you, Margo, go to the Weston History and Culture Center. So please grab some more drinks and snacks and desserts, and please purchase the book. So thank you all for coming.